You felt rejected, so you froze, questioned yourself, rewrote the memory to feel smaller. You convinced yourself it wasn't the right time, that you said too much, that next time you'll be more careful. Machiavelli would raise an eyebrow. Not because it surprised him, but because this is the predictable cycle that turns men into servants of their own fear. A man hesitates once, then builds a belief system around that hesitation. And just like that, he becomes manageable. This video is about dismantling that internal machinery and rebuilding it into something rejection can't touch. Something built for clarity, for control, for dominance. This is Machiavelli's mental reengineering, a ruthless internal protocol built not to soothe you, but to kill hesitation, dismantle guilt, mute emotional interference, and leave only precision. Clinical clarity. It doesn't involve therapy. It doesn't ask you to journal. It has no interest in making you feel better. It is designed for the man who's done chasing comfort and is ready to install control. He doesn't want peace. He wants power. And to get that, he must eliminate fear at the root. The modern man treats fear as something natural. Machiavelli would disagree. Fear is artificial, a system installed into your psyche by weak parents who taught you to stay quiet, by teachers who punished initiative, by friends who mocked your confidence, by failure you never reframed, and by a society that survives not on liberty, but on compliance. Fear isn't your flaw. It's your operating system. And that means it can be rewritten. But only after you drag it out of the dark and force it into the light. Most men walk through life under the illusion of strategy, when in truth, they're avoiding fear while pretending to be rational. They say, "Now's not the time. I'm being realistic. I'll act when I'm more prepared." But all of it is fear, dressed in professional language. Clean. Logical. Respectable. Still fear. If this hits somewhere you don't usually let people see, like, comment, subscribe. Not for noise. For signal. Let it reach the men still mistaking hesitation for strategy. Machiavelli would say the mind must be brutalized before it can become sovereign. Meaning, your brain must be reminded who's in charge, not through inspiration, but through cold repetition. This is the first and most violent shift. You are not afraid. You are a man processing fear, and that process is data. You learn to step outside it, to observe it, to dissect it like a threat, not obey it like a truth. You replace phrases like "I'm scared," "I'm not ready," "this makes me anxious," with surgical clarity. There is fear. This is a surge. It will pass. What intel does this signal contain? Because once you stop identifying with fear, it becomes an object. And objects can be broken, reprogrammed, redirected. The weak man tries to push through fear. The Machiavellian man inspects it like evidence. Because fear is rarely real, it's a neurological loop echoing from the past, replaying itself like a broken alarm. Your job is not to explain the alarm, it's to cut the wire. You don't manage fear. You starve it of relevance. Fear survives on your reaction. It eats hesitation. It thrives on rumination. It multiplies through avoidance. So you do the opposite. You touch fear daily, ritualistically, deliberately, coldly. Not once a month. Not when life surprises you. Every single day. Say what no one else dares to say. Post what you're afraid to be judged for. Enter the conversation you've been avoiding. Break the rule you were conditioned to follow without thinking. But here's the catch, you don't do it for thrill. You do it for rewiring. You're not conquering fear. You're retraining your nervous system to feel nothing when it appears. Because the more often you confront the edge, the duller it becomes. Eventually, the fear circuit burns out. That's not bravery. That's engineering. The brain follows repetition. And right now, fear is showing you catastrophe, rejection, humiliation, collapse. The result is paralysis. So you rewire the loop. You use Machiavelli's framework to reverse the imagery. Each time fear speaks, you close your eyes and overwrite the outcome, not with fantasy, but with dominance. Fear says, "If you say that, she'll leave." You respond, "Good. Let her go." The next one respects silence. And you see it, her leaving, and you, unaffected. Fear says, "If you fail, they'll laugh." You say, "Let them." Their laughter becomes silence when I return sharper. Then visualize the silence. Feel their tension. You're not escaping fear, you're assigning it new meaning. This is the emotional sterilization process. You are using imagery not for peace, but for mental supremacy. And you'll never eliminate fear by removing it alone. Nature doesn't allow emptiness. You can't delete fear and hope confidence grows in its place. You have to replace it with philosophy, with code. You install a mental operational system colder than fear itself. Pain is proof I'm leaving mediocrity. If I lose everything, I become dangerous. Fear is their last hope. The more they fear me, the harder they'll test me. Good. These phrases must not remain quotes. They must become mental defaults, spoken so often that the subconscious accepts them more deeply than it ever accepted fear. That's what Machiavelli would do. Not pray. Not panic. Not explain. He would install mental armor, philosophy so cold it makes fear embarrassing to obey. Because once your mind believes something harder than it fears something, fear dies. Quietly. Permanently. This isn't motivation. This is war. You are executing a full-scale rewrite of a mind softened by culture, school, trauma, and emotion. And Machiavelli's approach is not gentle, it's surgical. He wouldn't ask, "How do you feel?" He would ask, "Who owns your fear, you or your enemies?" Because fear isn't just a feeling. It's a form of currency. And if you're not destroying it, someone else is profiting from it. So you begin now. You stop expressing fear. You stop narrating it. You start handling it the way a machine handles data, coldly, efficiently, without emotion, without apology. Because the moment fear stops moving you is the moment you start moving the world. You weren't born afraid. You were trained to be. Trained by people, by failure, by misunderstood moments, and your brain responded the only way it knew. It created loops. Loops that now operate without permission. Loops that whisper before you speak. That stall your movement. That adjust your tone. That make you question yourself at the precise second you should strike. Machiavelli's mental reengineering doesn't comfort those loops, it burns them. Because fear isn't meant to be understood. It's meant to be broken. And the only way to break it is to go deeper, to stop negotiating with fear and rebuild the architecture that allowed it to exist. Your imagination is the most dangerous weapon you own. But when hijacked by fear, it becomes a torture device. What if they laugh at me? What if I fail again? What if I lose her? That's not reflection. That's self-poisoning. Every what if is your brain running an emotional simulation, and your body doesn't know it's fake. You sweat. Your breath shortens. Your posture collapses. Your voice weakens. Machiavelli would never allow that. Because the man who suffers imaginary outcomes becomes paralyzed in real ones. The solution? You starve the simulation. You respond to every what if with 2 words, so what? What if she leaves? So what? What if they reject me? So what? What if I lose everything? Then I rebuild it better. So what is not arrogance? It's neural dominance. You're cutting off the fuel line to fear's engine. You don't negotiate with it. You don't philosophize. You kill it instantly. And when that signal dies, the whole simulation shuts down. The system panics, and then silence. That's not emptiness. That's freedom. But modern culture trains you to comfort fear, to pet it, to whisper, it's okay. I'm safe. I'm allowed to feel this. Machiavelli would call that mental treason because every time you comfort fear, you confirm its authority. Instead, you condition your mind to punish weakness. Every time a fear-based thought arises, you trigger a micro-response. You stop mid-sentence. You clench your fist. You straighten your spine. You say cancel out loud. You redirect to action. It's not about rage. It's about disrupting the loop so violently that your brain learns fear equals punishment. And once fear no longer feels safe, it stops showing up. Because the brain only repeats what's rewarded. Now fear is punished. Power is rewarded. Action is rewarded. And hesitation becomes pain. This is high-level mental reengineering. You're not fighting fear, you're rewiring the machine that generates it. You will never erase fear as long as you see yourself as someone who deals with fear. You must replace the identity. Not by feeling strong, but by acting as if you have no fear until the brain has no choice but to submit. Repeat, I am not a man who fears. I do not hesitate. I move. Nothing can destroy me if I keep building. And you don't say this once and wait for confidence to appear. You say it daily. You say it when you wake up. You say it before speaking, before walking into tension, before the doubt creeps in. And even when the fear still whispers, you respond not with emotion, but with command. Because emotion fades. Repetition rewrites. This is Machiavellian mental reengineering. You're not trying to motivate yourself, you're installing code. Every time you repeat a phrase embedded with power, you're not just talking. You're writing a new operating system, one where fear no longer has access. Fear thrives on self-focus. Most men remain afraid because they've been convinced that analyzing their trauma is more noble than becoming dangerous. So they journal. They overanalyze. They spiral inward, endlessly working on themselves. But Machiavelli didn't create kings by healing their wounds. He created kings by making their pain irrelevant. You don't fix fear by understanding it. You fix it by leaving no space for it to live. When your calendar is filled with domination, movement, silence, strategy, fear has nowhere to hide. Because fear feeds on boredom. It grows inside idle minds, blank days, unclaimed effort. So you don't conquer fear, you remove its habitat. You don't need a breakthrough. You need a mission, one that consumes your mental bandwidth so completely that hesitation suffocates. Here's the paradox that ends fear permanently. The moment you accept the worst-case scenario and decide you'll survive it, fear has nothing left to offer. You lose her and keep breathing. You lose the job and build a better one. They reject you, you walk forward. You fail publicly, you return sharper and silent. You don't resist the worst case. You study it. Prepare for it. Embrace it with cold precision. Because once you've accepted that you have nothing to protect, you become the kind of man who cannot be threatened. And that is the final level of fearlessness. You are not brave. You are empty of hesitation. And the world feels it, in your movement, in your stare, in the silence between your words. You've been told fear is something to manage. But Machiavelli would tell you this: fear is either your master or your prey. There is no third category. You don't tame it. You hunt it. You build a brain that does not tolerate its voice. You don't suppress it. You drown it in repetition. You don't accept it. You burn it in motion. You don't analyze it. You override it with action. Because once fear dies, your movements become dangerous. Your tone becomes final. Your stare becomes untouchable. And that's when people stop underestimating you, not because you spoke louder, but because you stopped hesitating. That's when fear evaluates your system and is replaced with something colder: command. Without apology. Without emotion. Without resistance. Machiavelli wouldn't congratulate you for reaching this state. He'd expect it. Because this is the only kind of man the world can't ignore. Fear isn't weakness. It's a weapon. But here's the tragedy: most men were trained to be on the wrong end of it. You were taught to fear opinions, mistakes, silence, rejection. Machiavelli would teach you something entirely different. He who controls fear controls everyone who doesn't. Fearless men don't just move differently, they bend environments. They enter rooms and shift behavior, not by raising their voice, but by lowering their sensitivity to anything that could control them. That's what this method produces. It doesn't politely remove fear. It rewires your biology to kill it before it has time to take root. Because the man who no longer fears isn't playing the game. He's rewriting the rules. And at the center of it all lies one of the most invisible but paralyzing fears: the fear of not being allowed. Most men won't name it, but they live by it. Am I allowed to say this? Am I allowed to try that? Do I need permission first? They wait for signals, for green lights, for someone else to validate the move. But Machiavelli would cut through it clean: if you're waiting for permission, you've already submitted. You've already declared to the world, my movement depends on someone else's comfort. And that's how momentum dies. So here's the reprogramming move: assume permission. Unless someone physically stops you, it's yours. Say what you want. Ask for nothing. Act as if the system already belongs to you, because once you move like you belong, you do. Society punishes the timid. But it follows the self-assured. Why? Because most people are secretly waiting for someone to move first, someone willing to get hit. Be that man, even if your legs are shaking. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what happens when action overrides it. Fear's most loyal ally isn't physical pain, it's psychological avoidance. You dodge embarrassment. You sidestep rejection. You shrink from loss, awkwardness, discomfort. And every time you do, fear grows stronger. Machiavelli's system flips this. Pain isn't punishment, it's payment. Every time you walk through fear, you're not suffering, you're paying tax for power. Every moment you speak through a locked throat, you sharpen. Every action under pressure rewires your nervous system. Every time you're ignored, dismissed, or laughed at, your threshold increases. You're not enduring. You're purchasing a more dangerous self. So when fear rises, you don't back away. You don't blink. You smile quietly. You think, this is the cost, and then you pay it, once. Not twice. Not forever. That mindset makes you dangerous. Because when others run, you don't. You rise. One of the most efficient forms of Machiavellian mental reengineering is this: seek rejection on purpose. Not because you crave humiliation, but because you want to feel its power lose relevance. Most men spend their lives avoiding it. They speak carefully. They walk softly. They never ask for more. But the Machiavellian flips it. He enters spaces where rejection is almost certain, because after 5, 10, 50 rejections, something happens. It doesn't sting. It doesn't register. It becomes static. And when rejection becomes background noise, you become immune to social permission. That's when you start asking for what you want, commanding what you deserve, detaching from outcomes entirely. And that kind of freedom terrifies people, because most of them only move when they believe it'll get them approval. But you don't move on a leash. That makes you unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. Mental reengineering depends on consistency. You don't erase fear in a breakthrough. You erase it by stacking defiance. You build a streak. Day 1, you say the thing you were afraid to say. Day 2, you take the action you've avoided for months. Day 3, you embrace discomfort without commentary. Day 4, you get rejected and keep walking. Day 5, you hold composure while others collapse. And then you notice something: you've changed. The rhythm isn't dictated by fear anymore. It's yours. You set the tempo. You control the frame. You decide the outcome. This isn't spiritual. It isn't motivational. It's mechanical. Repetition becomes identity. The brain follows behavior. And if you move despite fear long enough, the fear stops appearing, because the system has accepted that this man no longer responds to it. He answers only to purpose. Most fear is rooted in the illusion that you have something to lose. You fear because your identity is built on being liked, on being safe, on being right, on being good. Machiavelli would call this suicidal architecture. You've built your internal system on quicksand. So when life shakes it, you collapse. The fix: build on what cannot be taken. Code like, I always adapt. I move forward, no matter what burns. I don't beg. I replace. I do not submit to emotion. Now, even if the deal collapses, the relationship ends, the reputation shatters, your structure holds. And that gives you an edge no fear can reach. Because when nothing can be taken from you, nothing can touch you. Most men never confront the final form of fear, not because it's hidden, but because it feels familiar. They mistake adrenaline for urgency, hesitation for meaning. Fear makes them feel alive, so they obey it. Machiavelli would tell you to stop romanticizing your own dysfunction. Fear isn't deep. It's noise. And it deserves none of your attention. The goal is not to feel brave. It's to feel nothing. Not power. Not resistance. Just the cold neutrality of movement. The way you close a door. The way you exhale. When fear becomes that ordinary, it loses narrative. And when it loses narrative, it loses leverage. Others pause. You don't. That's not confidence. That's correct execution. That's what happens when the mind is no longer negotiable. Machiavelli would recognize that as the final shift, when fear stops trying to speak because there's nothing left inside you that listens. And before he disappears, he'd leave you with the last truth: you were never afraid of the world. You were afraid of the version of yourself that doesn't ask, doesn't wait, doesn't apologize. The one that doesn't need to be liked. That fear wasn't weakness. It was dormant aggression, contained for years by civility, timing, and permission-seeking. And now it's ready to move. Most men will never reach that point. They're still journaling, still diagnosing, still waiting for clarity before they act. Machiavelli would laugh, not because reflection is useless, but because most use it to delay war. Introspection only matters if it produces a sharper blade. So here's your shift. Stop treating your fear like a puzzle. Treat it like a target. Every second you spend analyzing it is a second you could have used to outgrow it. You want to feel different? Build evidence. A body count of hesitation behind you. Not concepts. Not quotes. Not thoughts. Hits. Fast ones. Repeated ones. Don't explain fear. Don't manage it. Don't flinch when it appears. Strike it. Coldly. Repeatedly. Until your nervous system stops treating it like something worth responding to. Because fear doesn't end in some cinematic moment of victory. It ends the moment you stop feeding it. No language. No softness. No recognition. Just silence and movement. That's the goal. Not to overcome fear. To render it irrelevant. And if this was your first cut, don't stop here. Don't slip back into thinking. Keep slicing. You'll find the rest of the system inside power is design. Not to inspire you, to restructure you. Permanently.